We're thrilled to have welcomed our first grandbaby recently. But growing this precious human hasn't been easy on our daughter. The unrelenting pregnancy fatigue really took it out of her.
One thing that helped was keeping her fluids up, and she loved Rehydrate. Rehydrate is an essential electrolyte drink made by some great guys right here in Brizzy. It's safe during pregnancy and breastfeeding and is like a magical little energy and hydration boost for mum and bub.
If you're growing a little human or are just feeling a little run down, grab some at Coles today.
I began reading about rites of passage, and when we as the elders in a society don't create them and give them to the youth, they end up sort of making their own.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. Hello, my name's Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm dad to 6 daughters, the author of 6 books about raising families to be happy. Mrs. Happy Families, Kylie, my co-host, is not with me today. She's had to pop out and do some mum stuff, and I'm left alone to have a conversation with somebody that I've known on and off through social media for probably the last half a dozen years. Somebody who does what I think is incredibly imperative work. And I've brought him into the podcast today, this podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now, because I've been troubled with all of the comments that I've had from people about that, that Year 12 muck-up day scavenger hunt list story that we've talked about on the podcast once already last week, but just doesn't seem to be leaving the news. There's a bit of a stench about it. The man's name is Andrew Lyons, and Andrew is the owner, the director, the guy in charge of a business that's called The Right Journey, R-I-T-E, The Right Journey. Andrew, so good of you to be with me today. Thanks for joining in.
It's great to be here, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Andrew, for people, and I know that a lot of people will know who you are because your social media presence is really strong, but there's also going to be a handful of people that have never heard of Andrew Lyons and The Right Journey. Tell everyone a bit about what you do.
Yeah, Justin. So I am a teacher by trade, and many years ago, back in the late 90s, I became concerned about how the boys, especially at that point in my school, were going, and I sort of felt like many of them didn't have sort of father figures around. Some of them had stepdads that they didn't get along with. And at the time I was reading Steve Biddulph's The New Manhood book, and he spoke about teachers playing a co-parenting role with the boys. So I became interested in what conversations I could have with these young fellas and just help them become better young men, really, was how it started. And so the school was very generous and gave me a little bit of time to create a program for the boys. And then I became fascinated, having done that for a few years, with the idea of a rite of passage and some kind of initiation process. I was talking to the boys about what it might be to be a better guy, but I felt like that was filling their heads, and I wanted to have a deeper sort of heart, sort of spirit connection with them. And I began reading about rites of passage and became aware that in our current contemporary culture, here certainly in my circle of friends and connections, we didn't do this with our kids. We didn't actually initiate them into adulthood. And so I looked at how we could do that in a contemporary setting, and that was back in the early 2000s by then. And our school began to do that, and then some other schools became interested. And so I've dropped out of teaching now, and my main work is working with schools to help them create rites of passage processes for their young people to help them develop into responsible and resilient young adults.
I'm smiling to myself as you say that, because I'm thinking I can imagine you could have some really fun initiation ceremonies as they make their way into adulthood. I'm sure that you don't do any of the crazy stuff, but the rites of passage that have traditionally been, anthropologically part of what we do as humans, they're just not really nearly as visible or present in today's world as what we understand they would have been historically.
That's right, yeah. It's just in contemporary culture, what we're noticing, and which will lead into what we're about to talk about, is that, when we as the elders in a society don't offer that, don't create them and give them to the youth, they end up sort of making their own. They want to prove that they're adults, but they generally choose ways that aren't terribly healthy to be doing that.
So when you look at these Year 12 scavenger hunt lists, these kids from both public and private schools, from both girls and boys schools, who are creating these lists for what they're going to do on muck-up day and how they're going to score points by spitting on a homeless person or punching a stranger in the head for absolutely no reason, for leaving their human waste on a train or a bus. This stuff's, it's foul. I mean, it's just so putrid. And what I'm hearing you say is you think this is at least in part related to a lack of ritual and a lack of transition, I guess, from childhood to adulthood in healthy ways that adults have designated.
Yeah. So, one of the key parts of these rites across the eons has been a challenge. Like there's been challenges, often physical challenges that are given to the young people that they need to overcome to then move through into adulthood. And I almost see that when we're not giving them these challenges, that this is the kids will create them themselves, and that this is what they've done in this case is they've created something that's a challenge. It's something that gets the adrenaline going. But it's typically the challenges weren't completely disrespectful to other people in their community, which these obviously are.
Do you think there's any other reasons that they're doing this, Andrew? Or is it just about the ritual and the adrenaline, I'm trying to prove that I'm an independent human that can make my own decisions?
I think given the shift in society and the advent of social media, I think that also plays a little bit into what's going on here. I believe that when I'm working with parents, I'll mention that when I was a young person, I wasn't competing with the rest of the world. I wasn't competing with all of Instagram. I just was competing with really the kids in my community, the kids in my school. So if I was to do the most risky thing, I would only know about the risky things that the 300 kids at my school did. And one of the things I believe that's happening in this day and age is that kids have so much more access to these kind of things. And, the need, want to impress, to be seen a certain way, that also plays into it a little bit as well.
I'm hearing people say that it's also about brain development. I'm not sure that I buy that. I know that there's plenty of kids who aren't making these lists and aren't getting caught up in it. I know that the emotional brain can override the cognitive thinking part of the brain, and that can happen no matter whether you're 2 or 52. But I struggle with that brain development excuse. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I know that, we do know that brain development for the prefrontal cortex being the very last to form and often isn't until mid-20s. I think it may have something to do with it. I do think that the idea of the tribal things and the fact that someone has instigated it, whether these things have been in existence for a number of years, but, the inability for perhaps these young men and women to stand up and say, actually, no, I'm going to have nothing to do with that. I believe that there are times where that sort of tribal instinct comes in, and it's hard for the kids to step back. Perhaps we haven't spent enough time educating them on how to say no in those instances, and building that sort of values system, but also being willing to call people out and say, look, I don't want to be involved with that.
Yeah, the need to belong, it's so strong, and it's got to be impacting these decisions. The great news is that very, very rarely do these kids actually fulfill too many of these illegal and dangerous and unsafe activities that are on the scavenger hunt lists. They tend to stay with the safer kind of activities as a general rule, although there's a very small percentage of people who are always going to go too far. What do you think the parents need to know to be able to deal with this effectively if they've got kids who are moving towards the end of year 12 and the possibility that they might be involved in muck-up days themselves?
Yeah, I think conversations are really important. I mean, I think back to what happened when I was in year 12. I actually have a son who's doing year 12 this year. So we've had a little bit of a chat about that, a bit of a chat about, what might be something that might take account of moving into that next stage, but might not be disrespectful to other people, how you can enjoy that. But I think also giving kids opportunities to celebrate. Really, at the end of year 12, this is partly what it's about. It's one of those very important rites where it's a transition from out of the schooling system into the adult world or into tertiary education. And it's really natural that kids want to do something to celebrate that, to honour that moment. I believe schools could actually play a much larger role in that. And I think, the advent of schoolies is actually, again, that's the kids taking into hand, creating their own ritual. And we know that's been going on for many years. But partly that's because we haven't offered them something that fills that that need for them. And again, I come back to the fact that it's actually the elders' role in a society. If we're complaining about what these kids are doing, the fact is we haven't given them the alternative. And that's really our role as the elders. So I think that in schools, they could be working towards what kind of even trips away they might do. I know there are some schools that offer alternative schoolies processes. We were going to be running our first alternative schoolies camps this year as the Right Journey, except COVID put a stop to that. But
COVID's put a stop to a lot, hasn't it?
It has. But I think that giving students the opportunity for some kind of alternative, and it does need to meet the things that they're wanting. So we need to think and maybe sit with them and co-organise something. But I think I really encourage schools and even parents to work out what can we do to honour this moment, to give the kids something of what they're hoping to get from it, but to sort of rescue them from stepping too far over the edge.
Yeah, Andrew, just over a week ago, my Year 12 daughter, my second daughter, to finish high school, she had her end-of-year celebration. They had their formal, because we're in Queensland, we were able to actually have those formal celebrations, and just the sense of ritual, the tradition, the feeling that this is a symbol of what's occurred over the last 12 or 13 years of schooling. It was a really big deal, and it was great that she was able to do that. I'm curious, what about those kids who are in places where there have been lockdown restrictions and regulations that are preventing them from having the opportunity to have these rituals, these celebrations, these traditions? What would you say to parents about that?
I work with a number of schools in Melbourne who I believe are postponing those celebrations through until March or April next year, when they hope that they'll be able to do them. So I think hopefully the schools will perhaps be able to honour them at some point. But I think within families, I think it's really important that we create something for our kids that's going to, take the place of what would happen. And whether that's hopefully at some point that there's either a meal out, or you might be able to have a special event at your home if you're not able to get out to restaurants. But I do think it's really important to consider what that might be, how it might look, perhaps a gift or something that's meaningful that you'd like to get your child. So I believe that we can create these rituals, and given the context, if it needs to be changed a little bit, then that we have to take that into account. But I do think it's all possible, and I really do encourage parents to have a think about how that might look.
Yeah, really appreciate those ideas, Andrew. Thanks for sharing them with me. If people want more information about Andrew Lyons and The Right Journey, how can they find that?
So we have a website, which is therightjourney.com, and there's plenty of information there. And if they'd like to contact me, there's a contact page there. They're welcome to send through any questions that they might have.
Awesome. So that's The Right Journey, RITE, therightjourney.com. Andrew, great talking to you. Thanks so much for joining in.
Pleasure to be here, Justin. Thanks for the chat.
Well, we hope that you enjoy the podcast and the changes that we've been making, and we hope that you feel like you're increasingly part of the Happy Families family. If you are enjoying what we're doing, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. It's those reviews that help people to find the podcast and have happier families, or in the case of Andrew Lyons and The Right Journey, work out how to create some rituals that are going to help the kids to get through the year and grow up into great men and women from the boys and girls that they are. If you'd like more information about how we can help your family flourish, go to happyfamilies.com.au and click on memberships, or you can visit the Facebook page, Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families.